Arganissima, New York. Your exotic skin, hair, and beauty source, and your one-stop shop for all your natural and organic skin and hair care, featuring authentic organic Moroccan oil and prickly pear seed oil and much more. Bringing you only the best, straight from the source and proudly produced in the USA. So what are you waiting for? Shop today at www.arganissima.com. Arganissima, New York. Your beauty is our duty.
Folks, welcome back to the iHealth channel, the iHealth Radio, with your host, Hurricane H. A new day, new show, new topic. I am actually excited today. Very excited. And I'm always excited. As you guys see me on my shows, I'm always like all over the place and, too hyper. But today, it's an interesting topic that I'd like to bring. It's something that we've covered a little bit in a different chapter, different episode. It was a different angle with an author. But it was from a medical aspect of things. And today, actually, I have the real thing, and not taking away from my old guest. I mean, that was a different angle. Today, my topic is about the importance of planning for life, planning for afterlife, planning for family. Things that we sometimes take for granted. We do a lot of planning, daily. We have things that we guarantee, that we buy because we're supposed to, but sometimes we don't plan the big picture, and that could be to the detriment of our families, ourselves, and we don't know what could happen. Anyone today is here having a good time, and the next day things happen in life, and if you're caught off guard, it's a problem. And again, I'm always starting suspicious a little bit and suspenseful, but that's on purpose, just to get you guys a little excited. But again, as I said, I have the real thing with me today. And my guest is an attorney, someone who's going to guide us through the importance of planning. This is talking about living will, estate planning, all the trusts, and all the stuff that we probably hear about that we probably think, do I really need this? Is it going to cost me money? What are we going to do with it, right? So we're going to get all that stuff today squashed. We're going to get it clarified. We're going to get it to you so you know what to do from here on. So without any further ado, I have with me Nick Khalifa. He is actually an attorney in New York, and this is his specialty. But again, Nick is going to tell me a little bit more about his firm and his affiliation, the different services they provide. And of course, at the end of the show, please feel free to connect with Nick if you feel that there's a need that you do this. And probably by the end of the show, you will be interested in doing this because you will know why you need it. So Nick, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. And hopefully, like you said, the viewers will take a lot of valuable information today. And as you mentioned, I'm an attorney. My specialty is business planning, estate planning, probate, and what business planning and estate planning and real estate as well. So all the areas of practice that I do are very connected. And today's topic is the estate planning. And basically, we're just going to explain. I'm sure everybody knows what a will is, but throughout all my years in practice, I'm never surprised to find out that most people are not aware of how wills operate as far as the law is concerned, and who needs a will, and why do you need a will, and what happens if you have a will, what happens if you don't have a will. So just to go back to what I do, it's the estate planning aspect of it. Do planning from the basic all the way to the complicated with tax planning, stock, capital gains, crypto, things like that. And hopefully this is a topic for a future show. But for today, we're just going to start with the basics, explain to everyone things that should be mindful of, pitfalls, mistakes, things to avoid, things to do. Pretty much it. So.
All right. Well, Nick, that's a lot of stuff. And
yes.
I have to say, I mean, I think we can do a whole series because all the stuff that you do in the practice, they all relate to each other, as you said. And there's a lot of stuff in there.
Certainly. I mean, even just the wills and trusts, and we'll try to cover as much as possible today, but we can do something that I enjoy. I can probably do 5 hours of nonstop talking about it, but Don't worry, we're not going to do that to your viewers today. We're just going to keep it fun, simple, and basic, and just hoping that everybody will walk away with something very useful, at least to get the conversation started. And you and I had a personal discussion in the past when we met up, right? That for some reason this is considered maybe taboo, right? And I've dealt with clients from different backgrounds, different cultures, and I've noticed there's a common theme, right? There's this taboo that people think one of two. One, either if they make an appointment with an attorney to do the will, they're going to pass away, they're going to die. It's very strange, but believe it or not, I mean, some of your viewers may be smiling right now just thinking about it, and something that crossed their mind. It's something that people put off into the future. It's a conversation. It's uncomfortable, and I get it. I mean, I don't want to think about what happens when I pass away, right? We all have this idea that we are immortal, right? We're going to live forever, but unfortunately, that's not the case. And hopefully, everybody lives a long life. But as we mentioned, also, like, one of the common goals that people have. Why do we go to work every day, right? Everybody wants to create their own legacy. We build for a reason. We don't build to settle inside whatever we build in. That's one aspect of it, right? But everybody, I've talked to a lot of people, and this is a common thing across all cultures and backgrounds, right? Everybody is dedicated towards building a better future, right? But we get caught up in the building process, and we buy insurance for cars, and we buy insurance for buildings, and we buy insurance for everything. And if you've lived in the United States as long as we have, and anybody who's lived in the United States for at least a few months who's familiar with the system, you got to buy insurance for everything, right? You rent a car, insurance. You buy a ticket, they sell you insurance in case you cancel the ticket, right? And a lot of people take that extra insurance, as they should, and that insurance comes handy. But for whatever reason, right, that taboo maybe, they never take that insurance policy on their own affairs. And that's what I think when I think of estate planning. It's an insurance policy. Not that it pays you like an insurance policy, and I don't want to get lost in the comparison here, right? But it's you're ensuring that your hard work is protected. How? You pass away without a will, what happens to your property, your assets? Right? You're building a legacy, and we spend, some of us work 80, 90 hours a week building that legacy for many years. But that conversation, for some reason, and I've talked to many people, I talk to many people all the time. I recently did, a will for a professional, what I want to mention, very high professional, late 50s, 12 properties, no will. I'm never shocked. I'm not shocked anymore. And I'm not saying this to put anybody down. It is the reality. And what we do in my firm and what I do in my practice is trying to change the narrative, right? It's not a conversation about death. It's a conversation about protecting your legacy, your hard work, and making sure that, and when in the event you pass, once we pass, everybody is going to pass. We don't know when. So when people ask me, well, it's too soon for a will, as if there's, and I know they don't mean that they're certain when they're going to pass away. I know they mean is they don't want to have that conversation, and that is a big and major issue. And the issue is, it becomes problematic once you pass away. What happens, right? So in New York, if you pass away without a will, there's something called the intestate laws. The state determines who inherits. The judge will determine who inherits based on what the state law says. So they're going to see, the law is going to look at who's alive at the time, your heirs are law, and they're going to go down to children, grandchildren, go back up to siblings. It's a maze. And there's, everybody's probably familiar with the artist Prince, right? Prince is very popular with people for his music, but with estate planning attorneys, he's very popular because he passed away with $15 million and no will. And last I checked, I mean, I'm not up to date on the information. Last I checked, that's still stuck in litigation. trying to locate family members. And I'm sure he didn't work hard all his life to acquire that music, to create the music and acquire the rights to his music and the wealth and $50 million to give it to somebody he's never met before, or somebody who's never been there for him, right? So it's a sad story, and it's one of those where you ask people about, what do you know about Prince? They know the music. You ask an estate planning attorney about Prince, $50 million without a will, stuck in litigation, and the attorneys, of course. I mean, I don't want to presume, and I don't know the details of their probate, but I know it's been stuck in litigation. Somebody's paying those lawyers. Where's the money coming from? The money eventually comes from the estate. So you work so hard to build something, and just because you avoided that conversation, you avoided that small transaction, that putting all the stuff together, using an attorney, talking to somebody, right? You end up losing in the end. And when you have your kids now, they get along and they love each other, and that is the hope. But unfortunately, in my line of work, and I see what happens to the children, not all of them, and I see beautiful, inspiring examples of siblings who get along very nicely, and they don't even, some of them say, you know what, I've had a case where the client said, one of the siblings is like, I have money, I have no use for this inheritance, so I'm just gonna let my other siblings say, I don't want it. I'm very successful myself. But that's the good example. That's what you would hope for as a parent. But what I'm sitting, from what I see, that's not the case. Siblings relationships, they change over time. Spouses come into picture, children, feuds, disputes, family disagreements. I mean, I always tell my clients when we're having a conversation about the wills, I'm like, have you ever asked your family what they would like to eat? Can they agree? now you're gonna acquire this whole mass of hopefully wealth, and you're gonna leave them with no estate plan. Go figure. I mean, you're creating an unnecessary hardship on your family, your children, your legacy, and you're also, like I said, this is one of those difficult conversations because it's very personal. When other attorneys talk with their clients about a criminal case, it's personal, but they're talking about other people, right? And in estate planning, I'm talking to a parent, and I'm trying to warn them about the red flags of possible issues between their children. And so you can imagine these difficult conversations that I have day to day basis, where as an attorney, I have a duty to let people know. But how do you have that conversation with a client and say, well, what if your son doesn't want to pay your daughter? Oh, my kids are great. I'm sure they are. And I know doctors hate when I use this example, right? An attorney is like a doctor who works in the ER. Unfortunately, we see the worst cases the hospital sees, right? Other attorneys work in, I'm sure that's the case probably for most attorneys. You ask them how's their day, and it's a disaster, because as much as I try to plan my day, I'm in estate planning and I plan my day, but my day never goes as planned. Why? It's full of emergencies. It's just every day I try to stick to the schedule, but that never happens. So if you ever wonder why your attorney is late calling you for the appointment, it's because it's because somebody didn't take the advice the first time. Not talking to a lawyer when it comes to these things. And the consultations, most attorneys give free consultations, and there's a lot of information out there. So I urge people, regardless, to always think about these things and be mindful. So when is the right time to have a will? As an attorney, I don't want to commit malpractice on on a live YouTube and tell you that nobody, certain people do, certain don't. Everybody needs an attorney. Everybody needs a will. The hope is you never use it, and we're going to discuss the estate planning process, how it starts. The foundation is the will. As you progress in life and acquire more assets, I'm going to explain and go through the trust, what a trust means. And we're going to dispel some, pop culture misunderstandings about certain things, right? People think, when they think of a will in pop culture, that they take a notebook and they write their will. I leave, and it's done. But that's not the case, right? Some states do recognize these as wills or a codicil. New York does not. So in New York, you need paper, ink, signatures, two witnesses, and following a specific procedure and having the specific language in your will in order for will to be valid. And every time we do a will signing with a client, I always have to remind them that you cannot remove the staples. You cannot write on a will, because in New York, if you do that, the will is considered void. So this is how I'm telling you this example because this is how strict New York is when it comes to the wills. They take that very seriously. And maybe I have some bad news for some of the spouses who don't get along. You cannot disinherit your spouse in New York. So that's a little bit of a...
We got to talk about that. Well, so Nick, first things first.
Sorry to disappoint, but you can't do that.
This was like, I'm just listening and just absorbing. I'm just like taking all this, and we haven't even scratched the surface.
No, we haven't. Yeah, right.
It's amazing. First of all, you did say everybody. You wanted to say everybody needs a will, and then you said everybody needs an attorney. I think everyone needs an attorney.
Correct. I can't disagree with that notion.
Listen, it's to your benefit, but at the end of the day, I know personally, not even for will purposes and stuff, I've had my share of problems when I didn't consult, with an attorney. And things went south, and that's while I'm alive in business. But imagine, when, to your point, you leave in, kids and family, spouse, parents, you never know. But that's a big deal. So from me to you, I mean, listen, I agree with you. I think the recommendation is seek the legal advice, get the right, information. Don't wing it, because it pays better that way than the other way. Your losses are going to be worse.
Correct. And like, it's hard for me to say what I'm about to say as an attorney, because people presume that there is a self-interest, because as an attorney, when I recommend to people that you have to talk to an attorney, they're like, well, you're an attorney, of course you're going to say that. But if you just, pause for a second when that thought comes to mind, and remember that this amazing country was created by attorneys. Right? The Constitution is created by attorneys. Everything, and that's why the law and the legal aspect of our life, is involved in everything. You go rent a car, there's a legal contract. Right? You
no one reads.
You download, you upgrade. Your computer asks you want to upgrade whatever software you use, and you're like, sure. You click yes, and what happens? You got a 5,000 words worth of contract that nobody reads, but you have to agree to that contract before you use it, before you update the service or whatever you're doing, right? So this entire system is organized by attorneys. And if you take a look at people who acquire wealth and manage to keep it, or the wealthy, or the top, whatever you want to call them, 1%, 10%, a certain income bracket, the difference, and I always say the difference between what they do and what normal people do is they use attorneys, and for a reason. So there's this popular, maybe political phrase that we always hear, that these people don't pay their taxes, these people pay zero taxes. And I always, when I see these articles, I always like to do my own. I'm one of those people, I like to do like research on humans and how they react to news, and just kind of understand what the mindset, the mentality, and get some feedback, right? And I go through all the comments on these articles. And if I ever see a comment that says they must have great lawyers, I know it's a lawyer who left that comment, but people don't think about it. They think that somebody's doing something, and I'm not justifying, this is not a political debate or anything like that. But there is a reason, because these people manage to hold their wealth, maintain it, and pass on generational wealth. And which is, if you talk to any average person, they don't use maybe the term generational wealth, but they use the phrase, what the definition of generational wealth, right, is I'm going to work hard to build a better life. What does that mean? You build a better life, not for you, of course, but that's just a stepping stone, right? Most people who come from nothing or from a lower economic place, and they build themselves up, by the time they enjoy it, they got older. So who's going to enjoy it is the next generation. So the hope and the goal is for the next generation not to waste the money, correct? So, I mean, I can only imagine what happens when what would have happened when I was 21 if out of nowhere I received $100,000 check for, um, I'm gonna tell you, let's be honest. I mean, this is an honest
You would have
conversation.
taken
I
a
probably
nice
would have
trip.
went to the dealership, got myself a brand new Beamer, and
There you go.
you know, and at 42, I probably would do the same. But I don't know. No.
Midlife crisis. Midlife crisis.
But
Yeah.
and that is the beauty of doing estate planning, that you kind get to control, and you look at your family situation. If you have a disabled child, you can provide for that disabled child properly, right? If you have a child with special needs, if you have a child with a drug problem, if you're at a certain age and your children are already married, right, and you're looking at one of them, and you think maybe that marriage may not end very well, do you want your assets to end up being included in a divorce proceeding in the future? Everything that you worked hard for, and we're going to talk about some of the mistakes in a second that I see, that I come across in my practice all the time, which puts people in very difficult positions. Reason being is, we go back that you should talk to a lawyer. Unfortunately, what happens is, and I'm gonna be honest with your viewers on that advice, right? When you don't talk to a lawyer, when you don't do a free consultation, when you don't speak to somebody, get the right information, right, as we're providing over here, what happens is you're going to get the free stuff. What happens after you do get the free stuff? You're going to come back to an attorney and pay more. I remember back when in law school and attended a few lectures, one of my law professors said, "Hey, he was telling students about the future of the legal practice and their employment prospects. And he said, don't worry about LegalZoom. Yeah, people are going to go to LegalZoom for $100, and I'm not knocking them, but that's because when you do things on your own, sometimes you're not mindful of certain things that an attorney would, the red flags and the pitfalls and the mistakes, right? Yeah, you'll go spend $100 on LegalZoom, but what happens? You create a mess, or if you make a mistake and create a mess, you're going to go see a lawyer eventually, and you're going to pay more. It's going to cost a lot more. I mean, I'm currently handling an estate plan for somebody where they acquired so many assets in their individual names. And I'm looking at this and I'm like, you're investing a lot of money in income properties and this and that, and you own everything, you're exposed, but you don't have a will. You don't have a trust. It's frustrating, right? But now, because they went and acquired everything, and now we're doing the estate planning, the bill is high. I mean, the cost is expensive. Why? Because you went about it the wrong way. Had the client come to us first and say, look, I'm getting started. I just got married. I have a house and I have a business, and I'm thinking about acquiring this and that in the future. We would have set up a trust. And as the client acquired more properties, we would have added those properties into the trust one at a time. But now what we're having to do is create a trust and go back and transfer 7 properties that he owns into a trust. You can't be surprised that the cost becomes high, and it's a lot of work, and he's already exposed. Mm-hmm. God forbid something happens, he passes away, a lawsuit, this, that. So yes, they went about it without talking to an attorney, but what happens now is that they come back at the end, either it costs more, or they make such a costly mistake that when they pass away, somebody else is dealing with it. So you never, and I'm sure most people would agree that that's not what you work hard for. That's not why you build something, to make it difficult for your legacy, right? For your heirs at law, for your family, for your children. Everybody that I talk to, they work hard to make their lives better, their kids' life better, to give their kids a better life. And now you're going to leave them with a big mess. And yeah. So
Nick, that I couldn't agree more. I mean, I'm a parent, I have kids, and you know what? You work, and the hope that you're going to leave something for them, or at least you do the right thing, and whatever you
Mhm.
build over time, somebody's gonna take it over, and you want them to take over. I'd like to retire early and have my kids take over everything, right? That would be a nice thing to have, but it's not always gonna work that way, right? And I know that feeling, but I know everybody watching and listening, if you have kids, you don't have kids, you are somebody's kid, you probably are having the discussion one way or the other. Either
Mhm.
you are the parent having it, with your heirs, or it's the opposite. You're talking to your parents about what's going on. And by the way, you've covered at least you've alluded to a couple of items here that were very powerful, and we're going to talk in details about them, about the real problems and the things that can happen that people today were probably like, that can happen? Is that real? Yes, a lot of shit can happen, and I'm not cursing, but but
Yeah, correct. No.
we'll take the S word here. It's okay. But but here's what I wanted. What I just wanted to go back early on. You talked about this topic, and you mentioned the word taboo. And what was more interesting is that you talked about how it is, doesn't matter what culture, doesn't matter what believe in, it has the same theme. And you're right. You know what it is? No one wants to admit that we're gonna depart. And no
Mhm.
one wants to make that call today because of the uncertainties of the future, because let's see what happens. Usually that's what it is. Or maybe I can save money. You talked about cost. Let me not do this now. Later on,
Correct.
figure it out. Listen, guilty as charged. I mean, I'm sure everybody's watching like, damn, this sounds like me right now. But we have this problem, right? And you're right. That discussion is not a fun discussion. And then there's the other logic, right? Well, I'm working, and I have to plan for other people, and I have to make sure that they get stuff. That's the same discussion you mentioned about insurance. Life insurance is just about that. Like, nobody, you don't benefit from your life your life
Mhm.
policy. Typically, is whoever's left behind. So, and yet it is a common thing that people do. This is beyond that. This is actually more of, I have kids. I want to make sure they're secure. This. I don't want, to your point, an outside marriage, situation comes in and then takes all my wealth and all the hard built stuff. I mean, kind of like the Gucci story, right?
Okay.
There's that, those kind of things, right? So it's very big, and unfortunately today, hopefully, we'll dispel that. We'll take that away. It's not taboo. You can talk about it. We're supposed to have a will.
Mhm.
In some beliefs, actually, that's a mandatory thing. I'm not, depends on what religion. Some of the religions do demand that you have a will, always available. Now, that's old school stuff. But you mentioned something very important that I think our viewers and listeners, and we're talking about New York State in particular, but I think this goes along all states, and if not all nations. You're right. Law drives everything. We call the
Mhm.
law of the land. Constitution is the law of the
Exactly.
land. Everybody, laws change every day, and unless you're familiar with what's going on, you make mistakes. Oh, I didn't know. Well, ignorance is not a bliss in this case. Ignorance can cost you money, or a lot of things, right? So it's important to know these things. And again, I'm not, an attorney. Obviously, I'm more I'm on the insurance side, so I do some of the work on the back end to help people kind of mitigate some of these problems. But on the health side, but really, this on the media side, we want to just educate people, enlighten them about, what the potentials are and what could work, for them or against them. And the idea is, hopefully, they'll get that knowledge, they'll apply the knowledge, and really be thankful later on that they took that today. Someone may not even thought about it today, listen to the show, watching you, listen to you, and taking the feedback from you. Maybe like, wait a minute, the bulb goes on, and like, eureka, I got to do this. And by the way, you said something also very important. That doesn't have a claim time frame. you know we don't always die at 100 years, right? People die at early ages, at any ages. I mean, the pandemic was a very good example of what
Mhm.
could happen overnight. No one expected it. It happened. Millions left, right? The war now, I mean, in Ukraine, all wars, right? They come up, and next thing you know, people don't have homes, people lose their lives, the kids are refugees somewhere. That could happen anywhere, anytime. And so, and disease can happen, illness can happen, accidents happen, a lot of things can happen, right? So disasters. So we can think about all the bad scenarios that can happen. We just try to ignore those possibilities. And some scientists will say things are going to happen. It's not a matter of when or if, it's just when. And so the
Mhm.
when is, again,
Absolutely.
I actually have it's not a joke. I always say this. The one thing certain in life is death. And it sounds,
Unfortunately, yes.
think about it, it sounds
I
very
hate to
ironic.
agree, but you're right.
It sounds ironic, right? The one thing that's certain in life is that, which is just amazing.
Death
But
and
that,
taxes.
Well, yeah. Well, taxes depends. You can move to a country, maybe they don't charge you tax. I don't know if there's one of those, but tax free. But you're right. I mean, that's a second one. We'll take it. but it is you've. I mean, we haven't even touched like literally scratched the surface, but you've covered already elements that anyone watching and listening, their eyes should be bigger than mine right now, and literally, just like, damn, we want more of this. And frankly, I do want to actually maybe do multiple sessions, hopefully, because of timing, to just expand on these discussions. I know your time is valuable, and what you do here is really time free. This is a consultation in its own technically, but you give an advice, you give indication, which hopefully will lead to people, seeing the value of what you do and seeking the help with you or anybody else for that matter. But obviously, we want them to talk to you right now. But the idea is you're bringing something, and I don't know if there's other attorneys out there doing this. But thank you for doing this, because the idea of you accepting the invitation and being with me and hopefully, willing to share. I mean, I would thank you. And I hope that.
Oh, no, thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you and to your viewers. And that's why when we discussed this earlier, and when I thought about how this conversation was going to go today, I don't want to come here and give a lecture and say, well, this is a will. I'm going to explain the wills and the trusts and the differences. We're going to get to the legalese in a second, but I don't want it to be this boring legal conversation where we just kind of lecture of definitions, wills, and it's a lot of information. It's a lot to throw at people. And I think we had a previous conversation, and I said, I remember law school lectures, law students couldn't bear sitting for an hour listening to a legal lecture, and I'm not speaking on everybody. I'm sure everybody paid attention and passed. However, we wanted to make this conversation more warm, like a friendly, where it's gonna, like I said, and this is the approach that I'm taking, and this is the approach we take in my practice. So, as I mentioned earlier, we do business planning, estate planning, probate, and other things. But when we do the business planning, right, we talk to our client, and you and I had this conversation. One of the biggest, and I don't want to go off topic, but there's similarities, is when people go into business, they have a business plan, and that business plan changes over time. So when I hit this number, I'm going to tweak my business plan. If I'm not making enough money, then my business plan has to change. So your business plan always has to be fluid, right? It has to be open to changes, it has to be flexible. And an estate plan is the same thing. Hopefully you'll do a will and a trust once, but that's actually not the case, because unless you're going to remain in the same place and position in life and not acquire anything, then that's true. Yes, the will is not going to change. And that is also like this conversation that you have with the client, that you constantly have to be revisiting your plan. So people think, well, if I'm going to have to be doing that anyway, it means the plan that I have right now is not the plan that I'm going to need later on. So sometimes they overlook the value in having the plan now. But if you're not thinking about this now, if you're not starting the plan and modifying the plan as you go, and that is also one of the benefits of having a trust early on, because now you're not modifying the plan. You have a foundation, and you're just building on top of that foundation. This stands true for if you do everything without that plan. You're building a 7-story building, then you realize the first floor and the foundation is not solid, right? And now you have to do the work backwards. And when I talk to clients where we have to do the reverse engineering, you've already built the building and you don't consult with somebody about the foundation, and now I have to work on the foundation with a building that's already up there. So you can imagine, how complicated sometimes that work can get. But anyway, so the business planning, what we do, my partner and I, if you haven't started the business, we'll have the conversation of how to approach the business from a legal planning, from a legal structure. And it's the same thing with life, with your own life. Is if you have no assets, it's one thing, but you should still have a will. Why? Because God forbid something happens to you, right? Like if you remember what I said earlier, And I said, being a lawyer, just like being a doctor in the ER. Right? So we see these bad cases that most people don't think about. It doesn't cross their mind. It doesn't happen. Everybody thinks that wouldn't happen to me. Like, I had a one of my clients, her son passed away, and he's 18. Of course, didn't expect an 18-year-old to have a will, but he passed away from a medical procedure. Doctors made a mistake, and that was the cause of death. Right? So now, in order for us to sue the doctor for malpractice, who's the legal representative of the estate? There's no will.
18.
Again, he's 18, so we're just using an example of, set the age aside. That doesn't happen to anybody at any age. So you're 45 and you have children, and you go into a simple procedure, and a doctor makes a mistake, and now you're gone, which is what happened to this kid. Simple procedure, doctor made a mistake, things happen. That's life, and now we're having to start an administration proceeding, get the mother appointed, go through the whole process. If there's a will, that helps expedite, and we already know who's going to be the executor, who's the legal representative, who's going to sue for malpractice, or there's a car accident, or it doesn't have to be always negative. You win the lottery, or somebody discovers a winning ticket in your house after you pass away. What happens, right? So they have to go get it probated. So we'll get started. Let's talk about a little bit about the will. So the foundation, the basic, everybody's got to have a will. A will basically provides, you determine who receives, how your assets are distributed after you pass away, and who receives what, right? And there's general gifts or general bequests that you put in the will. For example, I say, I leave all my property to my children in equal shares, for example, presuming the spouse is deceased. But I had a gentleman, we did his will last time, and he said, look, I'm a construction guy. I want my tools to go to my son. I have 3 daughters and a son. They have no use for the tools, and he's in the same business. So I don't want the kids arguing. And those tools, I've collected them over decades of being in that business. And he's a handy guy, does a lot of nice work, and he takes pride on the tools that he owns. He said, I don't want the spouses of my daughter. I don't want any dispute. I want to remove all doubt. So we put in the will, the tools go to the son, for example. So this is called a specific bequest. So things that you want to think about as you start thinking about your will and your assets. The most important thing, and that's usually the conversation, that's kind of the delays the will signing, because it's something that most people have not thought about. They think about, okay, I'm going to leave my stuff to my children. Great. Who's going to be the executor? So the executor in the will is the person who's in charge, taking that physical will, filing the will with the probating the will, filing it with the surrogate's court to get appointed. So let's say, for example, in my will, if I appoint you as my executor, that doesn't mean you're automatically appointed when I pass away, right? You have to take the will, file it with the court, and the judge has to give you the official appointment. So the judge, once the judge reviews the will and make sure it's authentic, nobody has altered the will, made any changes, it's not void, it was witnessed properly, executed properly. And here's another issue before you get appointed. Let's say I have 3 children and they don't get along. So in order for you, now they can contest certain things. Now that opens up the door to litigation. And that's why we're going to talk about the trust and the differences between the will and a trust in that aspect. But in order for you as my executor to get appointed, you have to file the will with the court. That process, and ever since COVID, when clients ask me how long, I say, Nick, how long is it going to take to get my the executor to get my, to get the appointment? I don't know. Why? Because ever since COVID, it's really hard to give the clients an honest estimate. We can we can probate the will and file it with the court, and it could be done in a month, and you receive the letters. Unlikely, or a few months. And you can imagine people being frustrated. Their loved one passed away. They have no access to the money. They have no access to the assets. They're not able to talk to the mortgage lender. There's a house, for example, right? Who's making the payments on the mortgage? Now the mortgage is falling behind. The bank is putting late fees, legal fees, fines, commencing a foreclosure action. You're behind on taxes. There's no cash available. So there may be $100,000 in the account, but you cannot access the money because you haven't been appointed yet. So you've got to get appointed. And going back to your earlier point about COVID, what happened when COVID hit? Courts were closed for how many months? Can you imagine the backlog at surrogates court? So it was a nightmare. It's a disaster, right? Anybody who had a trust and passed away during that time, their children, were able to liquidate immediately, take advantage of the high real estate market, sell assets, liquidate, and had the access to cash immediately. People who did not have a will, can imagine how long their application has been, or their petition has been sitting in court. So things to think about as you start thinking about your will and the things you need to do. The assets and who you're going to leave what, that's usually the easy part. Who's going to be your executor? And I always recommend somebody from a younger generation. So as we age, or in the same age group, the last thing I want to do is, I mean, no offense to your age, you're still a young man, but I want to look into somebody who's a little younger, because the presumption is that the younger generation will outlive the older generation. At least that is the hope, right? So we always ask for, if they're married, if there's a married couple, we always go with the spouse being the executor, then a backup executor, successor, and another successor. Some people like to use two. And I always tell people, your will is your will. You do whatever you want. You appoint whoever you want. I personally, and some attorneys may disagree with me, I personally don't like delegating one job to more than one person at a time. Because now if I have one person overseas traveling, one person in the army or in service, now I need two people present at the same time to sign and execute documents. And by the way, here's a good tip, that if you're an executor or a trustee, you personally have to act as the executor and the trustee. So you cannot give somebody a power of attorney. And there's also a misconception, because I get clients all the time say, well, my co-trustee is in Europe, but we have a power of attorney from her. It's like, as a trustee, you cannot delegate a job that was delegated to you. Now, personally speaking, you can give a power of attorney to somebody, but in your capacity as an executor appointed by the court, you cannot go use a power of attorney and say, hey, you go cover my work. You go become an executor on my behalf. No, the judge appointed you, somebody named you in a trust, somebody named you in a will. You're the official appointee. You're not acting in your individual capacity as that person. You're acting as a position, as an executor or as a trustee. It's a fiduciary duty. There's what's called a fiduciary duty. You owe an obligation. You owe a duty to protect the interests of the beneficiaries. And you have to act according to that duty. And if you violate the duty, you get sued and so forth. So as whether if you're a single person or if you're married, or you have children, there's things that you want to think about. And now with the social media and the digital, and a lot of people have access or accounts on YouTube, for example, like and people have Instagram. I have a friend of mine who makes money on Instagram, has an Instagram store, and I always, it's a business. Who's going to have access to these accounts and manage and run all the stuff? So if you're not providing for that in your will and thinking about these issues, such a waste that you work so hard to build something big, or doesn't matter what size it, anything you build for you or for your family, it's something, it's worth protecting. Blood, sweat, and tears, as we say, go into creating wealth or and I don't mean, it doesn't have to be, when I say wealth, I don't want people to think, well, we're talking about just rich people. No, the wealth could be anything from a small amount to unlimited amounts, right? The definition is relative to the person. $100,000 is a lot of money to a lot of people, to most people, and I call that a wealth you generated. And you want to protect that, So you want to think about who would serve as an executor. And it's funny, I had a client, we were doing a consultation, and she's giving me names of executors. I was like, what are we doing here? She's like, well, I feel bad if I don't put this person, she's going to get upset. So I was like, oh, first of all, what you want to look for in an executor, it's a job. So it's the person who's going to go to court, who's going to do the legwork, right? It's going to hire an attorney. It's going to file and probate the will. Once they get the appointment, if there's a house, they're the ones who list the house with the broker. They're the ones who attend the closing to sign the papers. They're the ones who access the money. They're the ones who gather all the assets, liquidate, and say, okay, the will says you give this to that, to this person, to this person. It's a job. And by the way, it's a job that there's a compensation by law. So the surrogate's court has a formula. It's called a commission amount. So an executor is entitled to collect commissions, and a trustee is entitled to collect commissions. It's a job. So now the commissions cannot be any amount, just arbitrary amount. It's set by law, and there's a formula. Can't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but it's set based on the size of the estate that you're going to handle. So I always tell people, it's a job. You need somebody who's up to the job, somebody who's responsible, somebody who's going to do the legwork. I said, you're trying to be nice and give all these people. I said, we don't want to do that. Let's pick a responsible party, somebody who's responsible, who can handle this work. Married couples. And this is one of the things that I offer in my wills, and I'm sure other attorneys as well, but it's a conversation that for some reason, I don't know, I used to get surprised, but these things don't surprise me anymore. Just having the experience and doing, I don't know how many consultations over the years and seeing all these cases that, and I don't want to speak on behalf of people with the children, but there's another common thing. They don't think about who's going to care for the children. And I'm not, again, I'm trying to be, I don't want to offend the parents here, and I understand why it's something most people don't think about is they don't, the likelihood of a husband and wife or two spouses passing away in a car accident and the kids are home. But that happens. It could happen. Things like this happen all the time, unfortunately. And these are the things that we're exposed to on my end. Who's going to be the guardian? You have no will. It's a nightmare. You have a will, at least the way I prepare and I draft my wills in New York allows for something called a standby guardian. So I reference that in the will. And we also prepare ancillary documents on the sides to give an appointment for a standby guardian. Standby guardian that's valid for 60 days after the death. Then the standby guardian has to petition the court to get a permanent appointment from the judge. But it helps that there's an immediate person for the first 60 days who can care for the children, has the legal authority, and using those documents as proof that was the intention of the parents before they passed away. They took the time to make their intentions clear in the will and the ancillary documents that we prepare, that the children are provided for, right? So when that petition is submitted to the judge sees that this was the intention of the parents, and it makes the petition a lot easier and more guaranteed to go through and be granted. So they can make that permanent, but at least we provide for immediate help right after the passing of the parents. So that's another thing that I always urge people to think about. And, it's conversations, that should be had, should be had. I mean, couples often, they plan for the kids' future, right? College funds, schools, private schools, lunches, trips, summer camps, all that, college, grad school, marriages, some parents pay for weddings. But going back to the foundation, you're a young couple, young children, what happens in the event that you both pass away. Hopefully that never happens, but in the likelihood that this happens to you, in the event that happens to you, maybe there's a small likelihood that this may happen, but you put so much work into building wealth and putting the kids through college, and this is just one tiny thing that can make an invaluable difference in them. I mean,
Well, you could ruin everything. I mean, if all the
exactly
planning you did and then something happens suddenly, it's over. All the plans you planned did not happen. Now those kids will eventually probably suffer and not get what you expected for them to get because it was not pre-planned. I mean, this is like when we say, I mean, fail to plan, plan to fail. I mean, it's it's exactly that, and it's scary stuff. I mean, you're talking. I'm just like, my eyes keep, growing bigger. Just thinking about this, it's like it's not even funny because it's real. I mean, it hits you. I mean, I'm absorbing it, and if someone's watching and listening right now, you're probably going through the same thing. Like, damn, this is real. I mean, there's no,
exactly.
you can deny it, you can probably postpone it, not want to think about it, but it can happen to anyone. You've seen it, we've heard it, but again, we always think it happens to the other guys. Never happens to
Correct.
us, and it's unfortunate. It can happen to anyone in any given time and age. And to your point, it doesn't have to be when the kids are younger, even when they're older. It doesn't matter. Your wealth is your wealth. One question I had quickly before we go to the next now, the executor, the one that is selected, right? I know it's a job. First of all, do they have to accept? Ultimately, I'm assuming that there is a discussion. Even if I say I want you, Nick, Nick can say no, I don't want their job. It's too much. Is that something?
So it's a conversation. That's why if you recall what I said earlier, usually that delays the signing of the wills because people know, oh, sure, I'm leaving everything. First, it goes to my spouse, then to my children, or whatever the case may be. My children, depends on the family. But then, like, once we get to the conversation of the executor, and that usually delays because we have everything ready. And I'm actually dealing with this right now. We have a gentleman and his wife. We're doing an estate plan for them and his children, young children. Immigrant couple. So you can imagine that finding an executor to take on this job is a challenge. So it's been a few weeks. The drafts are ready to go. We're just waiting for the executor. So we always want to notify and make sure that people are up to the task. But we also, like I said, I always tell people, give me a couple of options. Give us a couple of options because my language, usually the language that I put in my wills, and I'm sure other attorneys do as well, that put a successor. We nominate a successor executor. So we say in the event this executor fails to be appointed, resigns, predeceases, or disqualified by the court, because that can happen. And by the way, an executor cannot have a felony. So a person that you may nominate today does not have a felony. In the future, if there's a felony, that becomes an issue with the courts in New York. It's always good to provide. You mentioned something earlier, like we were having that offline conversation. Remember, you said thinking like an attorney, you're always looking for the red flags. We're always trying to plan for what happens when something goes wrong, because I'm not even pessimist in real life. And, you and I are very much into this whole motivational and positive and healthy living. But the reality of it, it's as an attorney, it's my job. And that's what people pay me. That's what people use my service for. My expertise is to look for red flags. And how do I spot these red flags? They come from experience, right? There's a saying most people are familiar with. It's like the best criminal defense attorneys are the people who used to be prosecutors, right? Because they saw it on the back end, and now they're on the other side. And it's similarly, I see what happens when things go wrong, and a lot of these red flags that we spot beforehand in the early planning stages, they come from a place. They come from a place where we see what happens when things go wrong. We're exposed to things when they go wrong. So we try to take that experience and incorporate it in the early stage of estate planning. And like I said, sometimes it gets a little difficult because I'm seeing red flags. I don't know the children's relationship. I'm talking to the parent, And how do I present the red flag? Something that I've seen how siblings were, ripping each other, shredding each other. To this parent, I said, well, we should.
Maybe
They're
not.
like, oh, not my kids. Well, hopefully not. And, so this is always one of those conversations where you spot you've seen what happens when things go wrong, but how do you present it to the parent who loves their children unconditionally, and you don't know their family dynamics. Maybe, like I said, we've had a case where one child said, I have money, take it, I don't want it. But that rarely happens.
But Nick, sorry, just quickly. I've seen it. I mean, we've seen it in movies, but I've seen it in real life. I mean, families can kill each other, can do bad things to each other for money when it comes to inheritance. There's a lot of jokes and movies that actually depict that, but in reality, I've seen it in personal and family matters. You'd be surprised what people can do when it comes to somebody's departing and there's some money left or property for little money. Sometimes not even big. They'll go crazy for little things. It's amazing.
It reminded me of a quick story. I'll just speak on that subject, please. And I'm sharing this because this is not one of my clients. It was just a random consultation call that I recently received. Lady calls me and she said, I'm a beneficiary of a will. So just to set up the story, what happens when you're the executor, once you liquidate it and you're about to disperse the money, what happens is you do what's called a preliminary accounting, because there's expenses. So once you sell a house, you're paying the brokers, you're paying the lawyers, you're paying taxes, you're paying this, you're paying that, you're paying debts for the deceased, right? So now you're left with certain money. So there's something called preliminary accounting. We'll do 1 page saying, well, this is what the value of the estate, this is the expenses, this is the reimbursement, and this is what you're entitled to. If you agree, sign a release so we can give you the money. Because an executor doesn't want to also, or a trustee, when we talk about the trust, does not want to get sued for impropriety, or they don't want to get sued for breach of fiduciary duty, or somebody puts a claim that they mishandled the funds. Mm-hmm. So this lady we're setting this up for the quick story. This lady calls me out of nowhere, so quick consultation. She said, I'm a beneficiary. I'm one of the siblings, and they did the accounting. I'm about to receive $174,000. Okay, how can I help you? She said, they want me to sign the release, but I disagree with the accounting. Okay, what seems to be the problem? She said, they did not factor in the interest that the money earned while sitting in the bank. I said, how many siblings are you? 4. I said, how much is the amount? True story, $22. I said, look, every dollar should be accounted for. $22 should have been accounted for. However, do you want to contest and pay an attorney? I said, I'm an attorney who's turning
business away.
Business. But I'm not that, I don't, and I try not to get involved in these litigation matters between, we have in our firm somebody who does litigation. I try to stay more on this side, because when I did that other side, it wasn't a healthy way to live, because you're handling family disputes. It can take a huge toll on you. I think it's worse than criminal. I don't want to downside other practices, but you're representing one sibling against the other sibling. You're involved in family wars, and that is, I give props to the attorneys who do this work because it's necessary, but I stay away from that. So, but I said, listen, do you want us to take the case? You're going to give us a retainer? It's going to cost them legal fees, and what's going to happen is you're going to end up with less money. So to pursue the $22, you're going to end up with less money. But it's not right. I said, you're being too emotional about it. You're 4 of you. That means $22 split by 4 is how much? 5 and 50? I don't know if my math is right. Don't judge me. I'm a lawyer.
It's a good math.
Was it? All right. I'm impressed.
I think so.
But I said that. So I said, you're receiving $174,000. They miscalculated $22. just take the money. I said, I cannot in good faith. Like, what do you want me to do? Take a $5,000 retainer and sue them for $22? So that's the sort of things that we see that it just sometimes is mind-boggling. And those are siblings who've known each other probably decades, and at some point celebrated birthday parties, and they were good. And somehow, somewhere down the road, that relationship broke, and the parents pass away, and all that comes up. Now that the parent is not around, now all these things start to come up. So yeah, just to kind of you reminded me of that when you mentioned that amount. It just
Well, but again, Nick, it's amazing, but it's reality, and people listening, watching. I mean, listen, if you have siblings, family members, you love them with the best, and obviously, money should never be a factor between family. And at the end of the day, everybody should be content. And yes, money is good; it's going to help, especially if there's enough of it. But I don't personally. I don't believe in money splitting families. It's a means to an end, not the end itself. And I think I've seen enough destruction where people become literally enemies, and their blood related because of some left of. I had always a thing with my dad, and when he passed, he literally left nothing. I was happy. There's nothing to fight about and stuff. And believe it or not, even though there was nothing, there was some stuff that was in the house, and still people fought about it. Just to give you that indicator. So it's just as bad as it sounds for little minute stuff, things that you might not even think about, and you don't even expect people to actually go crazy about some of the tiny stuff. But it happens, and I'm giving my own example as just a testimony, but it's reality, and anyone listening, watching, you probably heard stories, or seen stories, or even experienced them. Again, this is exactly what we have this discussion is to give you guys insights about what to do, what to expect, and hopefully have these discussions and and make it so clean in those wills that there is no disputes and things like that. And I think this is exactly what the job is to avoid all that nonsense, and everybody gets what's owed to them, and the story, and everybody is happy. And even that may not be happy, because I may not agree with what my parents did, and therefore now I'm upset about everybody because, well, you got more than me. Why? And that still can happen. And unfortunately, there's nothing we can do about that.
Well, these things happen. Also, keep in mind, I mean, I did mention earlier that you cannot disinherit a spouse, and you cannot give a spouse less than what they're entitled to receive under the interstate laws of New York. So you can give them more, you cannot give them less, and you cannot disinherit them. So you cannot leave them out of the will. But you can disinherit other people, right? So for example, you have a couple of children, and one of them that you've had a bad relationship, and this happens quite often. And we'll bring up a real story in a second. It's a heartbreaking example, but I want to use that to kind of get people thinking and get that conversation going, right? What happens is when you have a will, you leave somebody out. That opens the door for them to contest. So let's say someone has 4 children. One of them has been distant for decades, does not check in on the parent, does not do anything. And the parent says, this child hasn't been around in 10, 15 years. They don't visit me. They don't call me. They're not helping me, right? So I'm going to leave them out of my will. That happens quite often. But then when you do that, but it's your will, and you're rightfully, that person is rightfully doing so. However, that child can show up when you probate the will, can show up and contest. Now, the will is clear. The will say that I, acting on my free will, intentionally, disinherit my child so-and-so. Reason being, we have witnesses, and I normally, when there's somebody being disinherited in a will, I document it. So we'll bring in the paralegal or a secretary or one of my colleagues, and we have a couple of third parties sit on that appointment and write a note and sign. This way, in the event in the future there's litigation, we can go and say, Judge, the person, that was their intention. And we have 2 third-party witnesses who took notes on that day. Well, I questioned when I asked and confirmed with this client before they passed away when we drafted the will. and and we put down the reasons in the notes, right? But what happens in the case when somebody shows up to your litigation? You always, how do most litigation, it's going to end up like most litigation end up, and not with a win, because a win is very costly, right? So what happens?
Settle.
You give them a settlement to go away. Say, okay, you know what? You're not entitled to anything, but the more we drag this in court, the more we're going to spend money on legal fees. And even if we win, we're going to end up with less money. So it becomes more of a judgment call. If this is going to cost us $20,000, $30,000 in litigation, they're going to offer that child maybe that amount, a little less, or whatever, or any amount that they can agree on, and say, just take this and disappear. Yes, you were left out. Yes, you're not entitled, but now that child is coming back to make their life a nightmare after their, mind you, these are like also difficult times. And when I tell clients, you've got to be mindful and remember that when you pass away, people around you, hopefully they loved you enough to care, but they're going through some tough times. Like, we've all been to funerals and we've all dealt in our personal lives with death of somebody as close to us. So and I hate to take clients back to these tough memories. Just anybody who's watching, just think back at a funeral you attended, or somebody, when somebody close to you passed away, your condition, right? Your emotional well-being at the time, everything that you're going through. So that being said, and being mindful of that, when you prepare the will, you don't want to give you don't want to cause additional issues. You don't want to leave them with a bigger burden than dealing, with the death, with your death, and and the fallout of what happens when we lose a loved one. So that's another thing to think about, and which leads us to the next subject, right? So we started the foundation, which is the will. How to avoid all these issues? How to, most of the time, just think of or just think of any wealthy, let's use the wealthy, because when people hear a trust, so we're going to dispel another pop culture, I think, is that the phrase? I don't know if people still say pop culture, yeah. But we're going to dispel this other myth about the trust. Popular culture, TV and music brought us this term of trust fund babies. I hear this so much. Sometimes people criticize, oh, look at these people, whatever, somebody like younger crowd, you'd be at a bar or restaurant and somebody's misbehaving, acting like a spoiled rich person, and people say, well, look, must be a trust fund baby. So people think about the trust, but they always equate it with the rich, because the rich utilizes this tool. But that tool is available to everybody. Mm-hmm. Everybody can have.
Nick, I'm sorry, it's funny. You remind me of Bad Boys, the movie. He was a cop, but he had plenty of money, so he was always being asked, like, why are you driving those nice cars and dressing up nicely? So yeah, that's exactly the example. So you're right. It's built in our culture. We see it, we enjoy it, and we don't pay no mind. But that is a
exactly, and people equate the trust. That I think that phrase trust fund kind of messed it up. Just kind of taken over the cultural, definition. But actually, the rich are rich because they know about these things. Besides the work, I'm talking about, and I want people to when they hear me saying these things, this is not coming from a business or a social or opinion or a political opinion. We're talking about strictly about legal and estate planning, right? So the reason the trusts are associated with the rich is because they have access to attorneys. They talk to attorneys. The reason they have the wealth is because they have attorneys, and so because they have that access, that everybody watching us today, regardless of their income level, they have access to that. Now, whether they need it and when do they need it, that would be the next discussion. But everybody has access to it. And basically, to simplify things, I'm going to give you the legal definition of a trust, but also I'm going to give you the practical definition so people can relate to what a trust is. So a trust is basically a contract between yourself as the grantor you're granting, or a donor, you're donating, or you're transferring an asset to a trust. So the trust itself is a legal contract between you as a grantor and the trustee. Now, depending on the type of the trust, that trustee can be you or someone else. And we'll talk about when you're allowed to be the trustee and when you are not allowed to be a trustee. And we're going to discuss the revocable trusts today and the irrevocable trusts, the differences between them and who uses them, why, and just kind of things to think about as you consider using a trust. And we'll give some real life examples. I'll share some stories and some of the trusts that I recently set up for clients and why we set them up and what the purpose and differences between them. However, going back to the definition, to the legal definition. The legal definition, it's a contract between you as a grantor and the trustee. You transfer assets held in a trust. So you basically transfer ownership from your name to the name of the trust. The trustee is in charge of managing, overseeing the trust. And you have the beneficiaries. So think about it also as very similar like a will. So the will, you say, I want my assets to go as follows, the distributions, the executor, the will has to pass through probate, through surrogate's court. The trust doesn't. And that's another reason why the rich uses it, because there's a privacy aspect to it as well. Because when you have a trust, the ownership is this disguised, it's not in your personal name. So people are doing searches, what properties you own, things are not coming up, right? You own things in a trust. And now when you try to search a lot of rich people, you don't know what they own. Why is that? So like I said, people always equate the trust of offshore accounts, but that's as you progress income level and as far as your needs. But on a basic level is the revocable, irrevocable trust, but we're going to discuss that in a second. So you have the beneficiaries. So just like a will, you decide what happens to your assets after you pass away. Now, the difference is in a will, that transfer happens after you pass away. In a living trust, there's different types of trust. There's a testamentary trust, that's something that you set up in a will, and we'll go back to that in a second, but we'll discuss the living will. That's the one that most people are familiar with. So you transfer the asset from your name to that trust. So the difference is in a will, the transfer is going to happen after you pass away. In a living trust, you're transferring the asset to kind of a middle. There's a stop before it reaches the beneficiary, right? So you get it out of your name, it's in the trust, and the trust is your own contract. You make your own rules, and that is the beauty about the trust. There's a couple of exceptions, again, for those trying to avoid giving property, away in a divorce case. You cannot use that to hide property and money from a divorce. And the family court has jurisdiction that can invalidate. I don't want to get into that, but we're just gonna go back, disappoint a few people that you cannot do that, not even a trust. Because I had a lot of people ask me this, well, what about if I put my stuff, this thing or that house or this money in a irrevocable trust? Would that protect me in divorce? Most likely not. I mean, and I don't want to go too deep. I'm not a divorce attorney, but let's just dispel that. You cannot, it's not a tool to hide assets. It's a tool to hide assets from the public that they don't see that it's being held in your name. So the practical definition, and I don't want to say I hate to use it, but I think over the years when I explain trusts to most people, and I've listened to a lot of explanations from attorneys, and everybody uses the legal definition. And for the most part, people get confused. They're not trained attorneys, and you don't expect them to be. and I'm not insulting any intelligence. It just, it's when you, as an attorney, explain things in legal terms, most people have a hard time understanding or maybe relating to the concept. So the
Dude,
easiest way.
You have your own language.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I had to.
That's what keeps us employed. I mean, what do you want us to go?
I know. Sorry, Nick, I had to.
Yeah, no, it's all right. It's I love it. Keep it coming. We'll keep that humor. Like I said, we want to make sure this legal conversation is interesting, and it's we can put a positive or more of a good vibe around the conversation, because it's one of those conversations, like we said, it's daunting, it's dark, it's death, and I try to change the narrative. No, it's you protecting your hard work, your generational wealth, your legacy for your children, for your family, or if you don't, for your charity. I mean, we have a lot of people that leave things to charity. I do pets trust, believe it or not. I mean, I've done one where somebody left everything to a dog. That's to them, that was that's their family, and that it is what it is. So like I said, it's
man's
your
best
own
friend.
rule book. Yeah, exactly. So a trust is your own rule book. You decide what happens, and you control certain things, and you can put a lot of things, because in a will, things got to get distributed, liquidated. Now you can leave certain money in a will, in a trust. So there's what's called, I don't want to call it a death trust, but a testamentary trust. Basically, if you don't have a trust now for certain people, so I add language in the will saying that if you have, for example, disabled child that receives benefits from the government, you don't want them receiving the money straight distribution from your will, right? Because that's going to cause them to get bumped off, kicked off the benefits. So we leave that money to them in a special needs trust or a supplemental needs trust. If you have a minor, and we're going back to the earlier conversation when we said you appoint a guardian, what else do you appoint in a will? You create a future trust for that child. So if the child is under 18, you say, well, I don't want that child to receive the money straight cash, or you can decide 21, right? But you set it up, you leave the money in a trust, and you give authority to the executor and say, I want, again, keep in mind, every time you hear trust, remember it's your own rule book. So you can set up your own rules. You say, I want to leave the money in a trust for this child, but I want the money to be spent on college, medical bills, living expenses, things like that. This way you can ensure, and that's another thing why a lot of wealthy and most wealthy and rich people, and not just them, and a lot of people who are mindful or are aware and utilize the trust planning, not because not everybody that I work with that does trust is wealthy. You don't have, like I said, it's for everybody. Once you start acquiring property, it's basically the revocable trust is a vehicle that makes the will dormant, right? So the will is the foundation. You've got to have it. And when I say the hope is you never use it, is because as you progress, you want to set up a trust and start putting things in a trust. So the will becomes a plan B in case we need to probate it for a different reason. But what we would like to do is we would like to transfer ownership into the trust and have everything flow out of the trust upon death without having to go to court. So back during the COVID days, anybody who had left everything in a trust, they passed away, courts were closed, they didn't need the courts. So that's one benefit, is you take that out of the courts. Two, it is what it is. Meaning, unless there is some, this crazy cause of action that somebody can sue, like, if you're hiding money for a divorce, otherwise, it's your own rule book. You give to whoever you want, you decide whatever you want. And you also avoid having your children or any beneficiary fighting in court, because this is not being administered. This is owned by the trust. So when you say, for example, I know putting a lot of stuff, and I don't want to confuse them. That is the challenge always when explaining the legal concepts and trying to kind of simplify these things. So let's just do an example, right? You own one house. You transfer the house to a trust. The trust becomes the owner of the house, and we do what's called a deed transfer. We take your name off the deed, we transfer it to the trust. Now, because the trust owns the house, if it's a revocable trust, you are the trustee. You nominate a trustee that will step in once you pass away. So that trustee is already authorized to represent the trust. The trust is the owner of the house, and again, it's your rule book. You can say, well, upon my death, I want the house to be sold, and I want both of my children, for example, to receive 50-50, or I have one child who's going to receive supplemental needs, one child's going to receive this, or my charity is going to receive the money, or I'm gonna put a restriction. I have a younger child, and there's a condition for them to receive the money, or the money can be spent on college, or they must be 25, or they must be married. It's your own rule book, and that is the beauty of it, is you can control. So this way, your money is not. The hope is, and you at least you're doing your best, that your money is not being burnt. After you pass away, it's not being spent immediately on silly stuff. It's not being flushed down the toilet, as they say. So that's another benefit, where you avoid probate. You avoid the judge being in charge. You have your own trustee who's in charge, and you eliminate the potential litigation. There's nobody contests, and you leave one child out. There's nothing they can do, for the most part. Again, this is the law, so we don't talk in absolutes, because there's always a lawyer who's going to come and say, well, there's yes, in the law, as you probably know, there's an exception to everything. But we're talking about general terms here, and
loopholes
and exceptions. So we're always got to be careful as an attorney, is when there's no absolutes. There's not 100%. There's always, but we're talking about, we're generally speaking, 95% of the cases, that's the way it works. So you eliminate the possibility of having somebody showing up to court and contesting. So what happens, when they contest, is more money, legal fees, your estate is being dragged, which brings me to my next point, why a lot of people like to utilize trust. Privacy. You never hear about, you take all the big names, right? Celebrities, wealthy people, anybody, who has this big families or big names, except Prince. You never hear about their estate in court. So the privacy is, when you have a will, as you should, when it gets probated in court, it's public records, because you're filing the actual will, the original, with the court, and it becomes public record. People can see your assets, who received what, and
people
it's
come
right
out
there.
of
You're putting your business out there in public and on the street. Basically, it's not Main Street; it's Court Street, but you're still putting it out on the street somewhere.
Somebody can claim you.
Exactly. So
that's my dad. Oh my God. Listen, I'm sure that happened. So
so that privacy is very important as you start to acquire wealth. And I have two principles as an attorney, and especially those principles that apply to my area of practice in real estate and estate planning. Right? I always say, in real estate, never invite, and maybe that's also coming from a little bit of a libertarian legal perspective, never invite the government to your house. That's on the real estate aspect. On estate planning, never pay the government more taxes than you should, legally speaking, of course, because there's ways, and that's another benefit of talking to an attorney. And I'm gonna bring up some real examples where those mistakes would have been so costly. I mean, would have been very cost prohibitive to the beneficiaries, and caused a huge capital gains tax bill, and how I was able to avoid it. And we'll bring up that example in a little bit, talking about the trust planning and how we utilize that to protect the capital gains and avoid certain unnecessary taxes. So yeah, once we were talking about that the trustee has the power. Now the privacy, right? The privacy, everything is being taken out of the public sphere into the private, minimizing litigation and ensuring privacy, and doing your best at least to preserve the generational wealth. So now, when we were talking about the trust fund babies or whatever you want to call them, I know it's a little bit of a popular culture term, but what is that? Why is that? What did their parents do? Well, their parents preserved the generational wealth and said, you know what, I've built this huge company, or I built this business, or built whatever it is. I mean, we all take pride on things we build, regardless of their size. I take pride of my humble practice, and everybody, it's very natural. We work hard, we build, especially if you're in the business of creating and building something. It means a lot to you, whether it's a career, whether it's a business, whether it's money, real estate, assets. We spend our lives, right? Days and hours and weeks and months and years of our lives acquiring these assets. So, and the reason certain people are successful in protecting that generational wealth and ensuring the proper transfer of generational wealth to their children, that protects their legacy. So even if their children or some of the children may squander some of the money, at least they have the proper protections on the assets, or at least they did the best they could in preventing that from happening. So that's the benefit. So we mentioned that we take it out of probate, minimizing litigation, privacy. And now there is also another tax aspect of it, and I'm going to get to that in a second. Now, there's different types of trusts, and we'll talk about it. We'll talk about the differences and why people utilize certain trusts over the other ones. So there's a lot of trusts. I mean, I can name trusts from here until probably tomorrow evening, but I'm just going to keep it today. And hopefully if we do a second session, I'm going to talk the next time we'll talk about the different types of trusts and for tax planning purposes. Huh?
We will.
Well,
Definitely. I'm going to hold you to that one.
Well, definitely, anytime, and I'll be more than happy to do so. Like I said, it's one of those things that I actually enjoy talking about, and I hope maybe you can tell I'm actually passionate about it. And I'll tell you how I got into this and why I think it kind of fits my personality as an attorney, and some of the things that I've practiced, and why I'm very drawn into this field and area of practice. And it kind of ties up with a lot of things that I do as well. So two different types of trusts. Revocable, it means, what it means. Revocable, you can revoke it. Well, you can revoke the transfer. And then irrevocable, that means once you transfer an asset out of your name and you put it in a trust, you cannot change your mind and take it back into your name. And a revocable, you do everything, and tomorrow you change your mind, you transfer everything back to you, rip it up, you move on. Not that simple, but in simple terms. So in a revocable, the main goal is basically estate planning and privacy. Estate planning, you take it out of your name, and it's in the trust. You ensure that it doesn't go through probate. Everybody receives everything pursuant to your rules and how you decided to make the distributions. In a revocable, you maintain control. So you are the trustee, and you nominate a future trustee to take over in the event that you pass away. So because it offers you control and you are the trustee, it does not offer you asset protection, meaning it's not judgment proof. So if somebody was to get a judgment, that judgment can be enforced. So let's say the trust owns a property and somebody puts a judgment, that revocable trust does not offer protection from creditors. Because you maintain the control, you can always change your mind and take the property back into your name. So that makes sense, legally speaking. The law cannot allow you cannot have it both ways, right? It would be nice, but it doesn't work that way. And the law is specifically, and that's why people call me like, I want to get this type of trust. Like they hear it somewhere, they do research, and that's why the estate planning, it's a conversation. Like I don't somebody calls me to get something. So now we need to do a consultation. We need to go through the conversation, the list of assets. I do a quick survey on your assets. I want to get to know you, your family, your kids. Not personally, per se, but I want to know everything about you so we can draft and prepare the estate plan that's suited and fitted for you. It's a plan, just like a business plan. You cannot use some other business plan for different business for your own business, right? You can look at certain things and say, all right, if you're in a restaurant, you can look at other restaurants and get ideas how they plan, but your restaurant is going to be a lot different than their restaurant. So your plan is going to be a little bit different. Your product is different. And similarly with the estate planning, your plan is going to be different. And I get a lot of people calling me. I had a consultation last week. A gentleman and his wife, they called me to set up a trust. It was recommended through a friend. They looked into it. They're like, we like this. I said, okay. Well, before we move forward, we need to do a consultation. Questionnaire, list of assets. I started talking to them. I realized, I said, it's premature. I said, I can sell you a trust. You don't need it now. I don't want you to hate me. You don't own property. It's rental. You have no assets yet besides bank accounts, where in an event you have bank accounts. And here's a tip for all the viewers and myself and you as well. And I remind clients, and now that I'm reminding the viewers, I need to remind myself as well, just to double check and make sure. Any account that you have with a financial institution, whether that it's a checking account, it's a savings account, 401k, regardless of the type of the account with a financial institution, make sure if you take anything besides the wills and trusts out of this conversation today, make sure you have beneficiaries on the accounts, always. And you'll be surprised how many clients come to me, after the parent passes away or whoever person passes away, and they find, well, we cannot access the bank account. The bank won't tell us if there are beneficiaries. That means because they're not a beneficiary, and now we have to probate. Do you know how much money is in the account? No. So now they're having to put a cost for an attorney and a cost for probate. There's no will, right? Just to get appointed in order to access the account. And we had a case where, there wasn't much. I mean, they spend legal fees, but they're like, we don't know. It could be 100,000. It could be nothing. Bank won't tell us. We can't find statements. And again, a person who's doing online banking, they could not access anything. There's no will. There's nobody is able to contact anyone to gain access to anything.
Wow.
So, as this world gets more complicated, being digital and going through, the economy has changed. Everything has changed. We're making money on Instagram. We're making money on YouTube. People own crypto. I talked to some of my friends who own crypto and they have crazy money in crypto. I'm like, do you have a beneficiary in that account? Do you have a will? Who would know what you have if you don't have a will and list at least? I know your assets can change. You may list the house and you may sell the house, but if you don't have that stuff down, people, your beneficiaries are left kind of in the cold, right? And they're trying to figure. I deal with these situations all the time. I'm dealing with this right now, where I have a client. They hired me. Their mom just passed away, and they're aware that there's a couple of financial accounts. They don't know how much money is in them, and now we're doing probate administration because there's no will, and hopefully there's enough money. Hopefully,
Nick,
they don't know.
You just literally probably crashed everybody watching and listening right now, because it just like, again, there's something that I didn't even think about. I mean, like, again, my wife and I, we share the accounts, so we have access to both, and it doesn't matter. But that's not necessarily a beneficiary, just another account holder.
Correct. A joint
account. Yeah. But again, the idea of a beneficiary, I didn't think about it that way, because you're right. If in case of an account that has no one,
and even if you have a will and a trust, I always tell people my opinion is, regardless of how much estate planning you have, at least leave. I mean, and you can always once you have a trust, there's another beauty of having the trust. You can make the trust the beneficiary on all accounts. So this way you don't have to put this person here, that person there, forget this one. That's why that's another benefit of having a trust early on is, people don't think about it. So, well, I don't need this, I don't have, but if you have a job and you're contributing to 401k, there's money in the future for you. If you're contributing to an IRA, there's money for you. If you pass away on the job, there may be a death benefit, So, you can make the trust the beneficiary on a lot of these accounts. And, but I always recommend to clients, with the trust, the trustee has access to the money immediately. But in the case of a will, here's another issue. If you have accounts, but the trust is not a beneficiary of the account, and you have no beneficiary, now you have a trust that owns a lot of stuff, and we did it to avoid probate, but a couple of accounts have no beneficiaries, and now we have to rely on the will. Remember I said Plan B, to go probate the will to gain access to that account. Unnecessary, burdensome. It's money that it's unnecessary expense.
Wow, I mean, listen, this is complicated. Easy and complicated.
So for example, let me give you like the client I was telling you about, right? We're doing administration. There's no will. And here's another thing. The fee, the cost is going to get paid either upfront or on the back end. So meaning, if you do a trust, if you do a full estate plan, so I offer a full package where, even if you do a trust, I include a will and all the ancillary documents, because Plan B is always, necessary in the event it's needed. Right? So doing a full estate plan with a trust, you will pay a little bit more. However, if you only have a will or you don't have a will, your beneficiaries are going to pay that cost and more on the back end. Meaning, so with this case I'm handling right now, the mother passed away, there's no will, and there's a house worth $550. And if you're in New York, $550 is not really much. It's a lot of money, but a house worth $550. It's not Texas. So we're talking about $550 in Texas. We're talking about a mansion with pool and a hot tub, But $550 in New York, it's not much. It's people who don't need to be spending money on courts and filing fee. And because, besides the fee that was paid to us to prepare a petition, which is not a crazy fee, but it's a flat fee to do the petition. The court, New York, surprise, surprise, New York State will charge you for everything, right? They tax us to breathe in the state. $1,250 is the filing fee for properties over $500,000. So now they're paying the petition to the attorney, and we're paying $1,250 as filing fee to the court. All this could have been avoided had we had a trust and the house is in a trust. Completely avoided, and it would have been a nominal cost up front, but now the children are paying the cost. And where's the money coming from? Luckily, the daughter is a beneficiary on one of the accounts, so she's using the late mom's money that she would have paid a little bit out of that money to, had we set it up, whether myself or whoever, with an attorney, set it up properly from the beginning. But now the kids are using the same money, but using a lot more of it. And who knows how long we're going to be in court before we get the daughter appointed. Hopefully not long, but completely unnecessary, could be avoided.
It's amazing. This story about these little things. You're right. I really find them very interesting, and these are real things. I think people watching and listening right now, they can relate to these things. And you're right. It's a small thing that we don't think about that can be costly in the long run. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what happens to all of us. We sometimes we get cheap, up front, or we don't think in advance and like what the ramifications in time. And the next thing you know, In this case, we're not even here. It's the other guys that are left behind that actually have to take the burden of all this and deal with it. And it's overwhelming. It's not easy. And to your point, one wants to go to the court system and wait and filing. And to your point, timing could be a lot of things and could be other issues that we don't even know about. So that is a big deal, and it's unfortunate. So Nick, I know we've covered a lot of grounds, and we're still in the end stage of the trust business right now. I did have one question, and again, maybe it's just me. Trust. Now, you said there is a grantor, someone that gives the actual trust, or the donor, or writes the contract, the trustee. But can that be actually in what do you call it, like an entity, or does it have to be a physical individual?
So the trust is normally a person, but the trust can own entities. So as we progress throughout the planning, and that is the beauty of having the trust. So if you have the trust, and let's say you set up an LLC for your business, the trust can own the LLC. The trust can own the house. The trust can be beneficiary on all your accounts. This way, what you do is the trust is in the center, and everything eventually flows back to the trust. So everything flows back into the trust, and upon death, everything will flow out as you determine and as you want it and to flow and distribute it pursuant to, like I said, it's your own rule book. So instead of leaving it in the hands of the judge, it's in your own hands, because the trustee cannot act on their own and just do whatever they like to do. It's, they have to look down at the trust and say, all right, I'm authorized to do this. I'm told to do that. I should be giving this person this much. So they cannot violate your rules. And if they violate your rules, like I said, it's a breach of fiduciary duty, and it's punishable, and they can get sued, and that exposes them to liability and litigation. So we did mention the revocable. Real quick, the revocable is very similar. It's a trust. However, because it's irrevocable, once you put something in it, you cannot take it back. So, and you cannot be the trustee. You have no control. Now, you have control when you initially set up the trust. So you put down all the rules. And of course, those rules have to be in compliance with the elements of a revocable trust, to make sure that it retains that status, because that irrevocable trust is judgment proof, or at least protects you from creditors. So, and because it protects you from creditors, the law does not allow you to have it both ways. You cannot have control. You control the trust, you transfer everything into the trust, and you have a third-party trustee. Could be your children, could be a friend, could be anybody, but you cannot be the trustee. And once you put it in a trust, you can, let's say if it's your house, you can, I usually provide a provision, there's a provision in a trust, say, well, the trustee is authorized, is empowered to sell the house and replace them. So they can sell the house, they can't give you the money, right? Because the whole purpose of this is judgment proof. So they can sell the house and use the money to buy your house. They can use the income, certain income, to pay expenses for you. So, the money still comes to you, not the main principal, not the main house, but there's an income, there's a rental, whatever the case may be. We provide in the trust how that money would be used.
Very nice.
So, an irrevocable trust, it protects you, and it has to be a third party. And because it does that, the irrevocable trust. So the revocable trust is an entity, but you and the entity are one of the same. Meaning the revocable, it's reported under your social security number. The irrevocable is a separate entity. And I was gonna, real quick, earlier I said we're gonna discuss the legal definition of a trust. And I think the best example that most people can relate to, think about it when you open a business. You don't open a business in your name, because what does that do?
Liability.
Exposure, liability, right? Exactly. So you set up a business under a corporation, under LLC, whatever entity that works for you, or that's suitable for your business. A revocable trust is, the trusts in general are similar. It's a separate entity from you, but in a revocable trust, you and the entity are one of the same, because it does not give you the protection. The irrevocable trust is a completely separate entity from you, and it has its own tax ID number, And if it generates income, it pays its own taxes at a higher or a different tax rate. Could be higher than yours, could be, I think if I'm not mistaken, it's 30 some percent, the tax rate. Don't quote me on that one.
It's like a corporation. It's almost like a corporation.
Pretty much. It has its own tax ID number, reports its own taxes and whatnot. So quick example. So, we're not taking much of the time. I recently did a irrevocable trust for a client. He's a doctor, and he specializes in an area of practice where it's one of the highest, and I can't remember exactly if that's the highest or one of the highest. I don't want to say what it is because we don't want to give clues to what the client is, but it's one of those highest practices in the medical field where they are susceptible to malpractice claims. So because of that, he's always concerned that, yes, I do have malpractice insurance, but in the event that malpractice insurance does not cover everything, what if I lose a claim and the malpractice insurance does not cover the entire amount? What happens next? And he had multiple properties, some we have in LLCs, and here's the catch: 2 of his children are in medical school on their way to become doctors in a similar field.
High risk.
So we did because he's like, at bare minimum, he said, and that was his, that's what he wanted to do. He said, I want to put this house in an irrevocable trust for this child, the other house in an irrevocable trust for this other child. And this way, both I'm protected, the houses are protected, and they are protected in the future because they're going to be young doctors doing in the same exact field. He's like, I'm not taking any chances. And we have other, we structured these other assets in a different way. I just want to use that example. So that's one example of why, somebody who's not overly wealthy, that does very well, but how we utilized the irrevocable trust to offer them protection and avoid probate at the same time.
Well, I think it does sound like that. I think out of all the will, the revocable and irrevocable, I think the irrevocable is the best, platform, the best way to really measure it up. And it will come with a backup will. So that's good. So you'll have that as plan B, as you said. And so at the end of the day, for someone who has some assets, personally, it sounds like that's what I'd like to particularly consider. I don't have
you
a lot
should
of
set
assets.
up a consultation. I know this great lawyer I can recommend.
Let me guess, Nick, right? Well, listen, I do appreciate it. This was really an eye opener for me specifically, and I know people are going to watch. It is a long, show, but definitely there's a lot of stuff, and it's not easy language. We have to break it down, and we have to make it like where it sounds a little bit more direct. And the stories and the examples you've given, these are real examples that you deal with daily.
Real people, exactly.
Real
that can happen
people,
to anybody.
Real stories, real problems, real challenges, and you are there in the middle to mitigate all this and help navigate the system, which is it's not meant to be easy. Period. It's no one wants to
set
go
up by lawyers, so we didn't want to make it so easy on everybody.
Well, I guess that's job security, right? Well, listen, whether we like it or not, that is the way it is. And you said it is what it is, right? In the irrevocable, right? It's the same thing. We have no choice, and life goes on. We got to adapt to it. The system operates a certain way, and you have to find a way. But if you don't know, that's the thing. Ignorance here is not a choice. If you can't claim, I didn't know. You didn't know, then you pay, or your kids will pay, your family will pay.
Yeah.
I think the idea is that we should do our due diligence. We should at least consult. Consultation, to your point, is free, and you give guidance. And again, I'm not sure what the cost is, for an actual trust or will, and is that big numbers, small numbers? I don't know. Maybe we can talk about that the next show. But at the end of the day, is it worth it? I think it's worth it for especially if you have assets. I think someone who has something to leave behind, at a minimum, we all live somewhere, and if you're not renting, you are buying, or you have a mortgage, that could be a problem. You just mentioned something as simple as the bank accounts. Everybody has a bank account somehow, right? It could be $100, it could be $1 million. It doesn't matter. To your point, if we can't see what's in it, we have to go through all the back road only to find out what's in it. It could be pennies, right? And it's a problem. So the stuff that you've covered, really, it's like anyone doesn't matter. And again, we're talking New York, and I'm pretty sure across other states it's very similar in laws. Maybe some states will be a little lax, and maybe others will be probably worse. And I'm sure other countries, a lot of these things will probably apply too. So watching this, listening to this, anywhere around the world, if you want to learn about the New York law, well, I guess you're getting a nice crash course today on
There we
on
go.
how it works. But again,
We barely scratched the surface. I mean, I didn't realize this much time has passed, and
well,
just
it's an
again, it's one of those things that I enjoy talking about. For me, it just felt like only 15 minutes, but there's a lot
you
more.
get caught up. You
This
get
is
caught up.
the tip of the iceberg. We haven't even got to tax planning, charitable remainder trust. It's a well that's very deep.
Listen, Nick. I can tell you this: I am not going anywhere. Hopefully, I live long enough. But we certainly want to do this and bring in more value and more insights, and maybe take the next stages. Because I think we have given a huge dose today to people for a lot of things, and we've covered a lot of grounds. And maybe we can resume on the next one. Just
Absolutely.
retouch a little bit of summary on the trust, and then maybe talk about the tax shelter and all the other stuff that you mentioned, or the different measures that can be there. And you're right. And we talked about like how people allocate their business accordingly, and they seek the attorneys. And again, the stereotype or the standard is like, if you're rich, you know how to do it because you have the attorneys. But to your point, we all have access to attorneys, and it doesn't have to cost us millions, to do this. Obviously, the more assets you have, the more it's going to cost you. The more money you have, the more it's going to cost you. But it could do it at your own proportion, and as simple as basic needs can be met. And I think we all can benefit from that. I mean, you and I, we're going to have this discussion separate later, to talk about what can be, and again, I'm not, I don't have a lot, but I do have a home, and certainly there's some equity, whatever the case may be. And therefore, I have children. So there's something to always, consider. And I haven't thought about it. I mean, to be honest with you, you didn't think about it. I didn't. I told you a good test charge personally. I'm one of those. I'm one of many.
It's one of those things that we're all. I know I've mentioned that most people don't, and we're all guilty. I mean, if I didn't practice this, most likely, and believe it or not, I talk to a lot of lawyers outside of my area of practice who don't have an estate plan. And that is a problem. That is a problem, because especially as an attorney, you have files, you have clients, you have to be thinking of, well, if I'm out tomorrow, what happens? And businesses, I talk to a lot of businesses that they don't have what's called a succession provision in their LLC agreement. What happens if a partner dies in the middle of the business?
Oh, we got to talk about that. That's big, because I think everybody's watching. And today you mentioned Instagram, social, those are businesses. Some people work together in teams. There's a lot of things. And you're right. When you have a business and something happens, how does it work? Who gets what, the shares, the spouse, what type of, so I know there's a lot we can discuss about this. So again, I mean, I just don't want to make this, further any longer, but certainly, I appreciate every minute here, and, we took a lot, but it's worth absorbing. I think if you are listening and watching, yes, it's going to seem long, but just take it. It won't put you to sleep. It will actually teach you.
Well,
and actually, it's done at a good pace.
I did the legal disclaimer, and I said I can talk about this for days. I was serious. I don't know if you thought I was joking, but now I'm serious.
Listen,
no, but it is, and again, it's like I said, it's a conversation that people got to start thinking about, and it's a conversation to be had, and it's an ongoing conversation as we progress in life, as we acquire more, as we do more. So if anything that hopefully your viewers and take out of this conversation is start thinking. Once you start acquiring, once you start we're different people in different stages, and if you're early 20s, you just got your first job, and at least make sure you have beneficiaries and a basic will. If you just purchase a home in your own name, okay, start thinking about what happens, to this home if something was to happen, right, to me. Basic will, things like, as you start making more income, you get married, you have children. It's like, and I keep going back to that earlier point, it's an ongoing conversation. In estate planning, think about it as, if you're a business owner, you're constantly revising, updating your business plan. And it should be the same case with your estate plan, at least having a conversation, at least thinking about, at bare minimum, at least having a will, and as you progress in life, we can start building on that and utilizing all these tools. And there's a lot that people don't know about, and that saves a lot of money. And we'll talk about taxes and saving people money next time. And I'm not a tax attorney, but I talk taxes. I can talk about taxes all day because, again, never pay the government more than you should, legally speaking.
And by the way, the government will probably say that too. I mean, I know they're going to want the money, but at the end of the day, the rules are there.
I mean, legally speaking, make sure you have a lawyer that saves you as much money on taxes as possible, and a CPA, and a good tax person. And
Nick, you said it. I mean, you're right. We always have this perception: oh, these guys don't pay any taxes, or little taxes, or small percentage, while the poor, may pay a lot more. Because again, there's assets, that pay. There's credits. There's businesses. All that stuff is claimable and deductible, and you can use a lot of that stuff. And which movie was it? Getty, I think. Getty, was it Getty, the oil company? I think that's what it is. There was a movie that about a couple of years ago, I think, came up about the story about that whole oil company, and the owner and all his assets were actually in art. That's where he had and millions, I think, of billions of worth in dollars, but everything was art, so it was all not taxable, something of that nature. So it was just interesting how the wealth was built, but it was limited, and I think there was trust in it. There was all this stuff that you talk about. I mean, it's an ideal scenario of. I forgot. I think it was Getty. I think that's the brand, or at least the oil company. It's going away.
The difference from how things used to be to what it is now. Back then, before this whole technology, the boom in technology, it used to be if you have money, you have access to information because you have lawyers. Now everybody has access to information, regardless of their income level, whether they have an attorney or not. So the information is out there, and the help is out there, and people will be surprised that it's not as costly as they would imagine. There's this whole bad or negative connotation with attorneys that when it comes to money and things like that. But we can prove them wrong.
Definitely. And by the way, I think you're sharing stuff that anyone can benefit from. I don't think anyone here listening, watching will not benefit from this. Today, tomorrow, they can even give advice to somebody, share this with someone to help them. Maybe they know someone who's going through challenges that not sure. Maybe that's an opportunity. And folks, again, feel free and reach out. If you're in New York, I mean, certainly reach out to our dear friend here, and Nick will take care of you, and we'll certainly give you the consultation and work with you and see what can be done. And I know you have other practices or other types of laws that you've covered. I mean, you do real estate personally and estate planning, but you have other things that you do in your practice with your partners. And what are those? Just to give an indicator.
Correct. So I do estate planning, real estate, and business planning. So. And they all relate, because when somebody purchases a home, we talk about the estate planning, real estate and trusts and LLC and holding real estate and different estate planning vehicles or tools, business planning. So my business partner and we help businesses become legally organized, better organized. So if you starting a business, we'll consult you and help you with the LLC, or let's say if we're talking about LLC or bylaws or corporation, whatever it may be. If you have an existing business, from my experience, a lot of businesses in existence right now don't have an operating agreement. So we go look at their business and figure out exactly who does what is the best structure, whether it's LLC, whether it's an S corporation, how they should be paying themselves, how they should be paying their partners, how they should be taking distributions. We work with medical practices, medical clinics. We help doctors become more profitable by looking at their practice, eliminating certain things that doctors do for themselves and delegating some of the work they do. We help doctors and labs, medical professionals buy and sell medical practices and labs. We help doctors organize under one umbrella. You're familiar probably with the medical field, that a lot of doctors group under one umbrella, under one tax ID number, so they can maintain the business within network. They can create their own network and bill insurance companies different rates as they're organized. I do estate planning, trusts. I do probate, but uncontested probate. As I mentioned, we have somebody who does litigation. When it gets to that, I just don't get involved in family disputes. I'm in the preventive legal care. That's what I like to,
I love
the guy
that.
you want to talk to as you preparing your business, you're planning your business, you're selling your business, you're passing on your business or your personal assets or your estate, your trust. My business partner, Eugene, he does a lot of labs, represents a lot of labs and medical offices as well. My partner, Josh, is the litigation guy. So he's the guy we send to court. And he's one of those attorneys who is like legal encyclopedia. I love this guy. You can ask him any question about anything and faster than a Google, search.
Oh boy, Google's not gonna
Amazing.
like that.
Shout out to Josh if you're watching. He's an amazing guy. He's the guy you don't want to see in court. Very nice guy, true gentleman, but he wins in court. So we have this trifecta of a partnership where I do certain things. So we merge our practices together. Between myself, my partner Eugene, and Josh, we have this trifecta where one person handles commercial healthcare, commercial real estate, healthcare, litigation, federal, employment, trademark, discrimination, all that good stuff. So, we have people under our umbrella that handle a lot of other things. So we kind of have this modern legal firm where, it's a collaboration between attorneys who do different areas of practice where we support each other, help each other, and kind of have this strong platform for clients that they utilize so they don't have to go elsewhere. And I have my real estate lawyers working with my partner doing a trademark for their business. So we help businesses from a legal perspective, utilize their tax advantages, their legal structures. I help people buy, sell real estate planning, their trusts, and everything in between. And
you guys are a full house. You got like a one-stop shop. Everything goes under the sun.
Yeah, well,
you
keep in mind, like my areas of practice are very connected because if I'm representing an estate and the trust, we're selling property. I'm also a real estate attorney, and that is also a benefit to my clients who use me as a real estate attorney because I know a lot about estate planning. So I'm always having, and as you can tell that I enjoy talking about this. Is something that I'm passionate about, and it's fun. It's one of those things that I can sit back and I put on some I listen. So if you're a client who's watching and if you wonder how I draft your papers in the evening, I have this station on YouTube that plays bourbon jazz.
Nice.
It's very soothing, very relaxing with a glass of wine, and I sit down and I kind of have my imagination run wild and trying to figure out the structures. I daydream about certain structures and how I can utilize these structures to help my clients save money on taxes and have the best legal product possible and representation and success, protecting their hard-earned money and businesses.
Well, we need that, and people need that, and we're gonna talk more about this, in the next, get together here, not far from today. We're gonna have to plan something soon to do a quick comeback and get you back in, and hopefully, I know your schedule is tough, but we'll make it work. I think there's so much value here, and hopefully people can reach out to you, whether it's real estate, whether any of those aspects you mentioned, business planning, starting the business, figuring out the assets and all this. I think there's plenty. So that being said, I just want to thank you first, and I also want to thank your partners. Your partners, they're not here. You talk to them passionately, and you definitely gave us a good picture about what they do and how.
No, I told them, I warned them. I said, if you don't watch the entire show, we're gonna have some partnership issues. No, they're great guys, and I know they're watching, and and again, I hope your viewers found this useful, and hopefully we'll gave them more value today. And we'll continue to give them more value in the future.
Yes, sir. Well, Nick, with that, I do want to conclude today's show, and I thank you so much for the time and for everything. I mean, it was just amazing. I appreciate it, folks. I hope you enjoyed this particular show, and stay tuned for more. So just be prepared. It's going to be a lot more intense. That being said, I'm Hurricane H. I'll be talking to you soon. New day, new show, new topic. And also, we're coming back with our dear friend here with multiple topics within the legal realm of trust and will and planning your life, basically. So we'll talk soon. Bye for now.